My name is Clara Evans, I'm 29 years old, and I'm a multi-million-dollar secret my family has no idea exists. The phone buzzed on the polished marble of my kitchen island, interrupting the panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in 6 months, Marcus Evans. My brother. I let it ring twice before answering, bracing myself. Clara, he said, his voice void of any warmth. It was the same commanding tone he used on his underlings, not his sister. We're having a family meeting. Mom fell again. Her osteoporosis is getting worse. And Dad, well, Dad's memory is shot. We need to figure out long-term care. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. The genuine worry for my parents was immediately tangled with the dread of dealing with my siblings. Okay, Marcus. When? This weekend. I've already booked your flight. Of course, he had. He didn't ask, he informed. It's economy, so don't expect champagne. Just get here. He paused, and I could practically hear the smirk forming on his lips. Try to make it back, and, if you can, contribute a little something. Every penny helps. I know things are tight for you. The line went dead before I could respond. Tight for you. The words echoed in my silent, cavernous loft. I glanced around at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the minimalist art on the walls, the life I had built in absolute secrecy. Tight wasn't exactly the word I'd use. The call dredged up ghosts I had tried to bury. 10 years ago, I was a college kid with a revolutionary idea. I'd spent a whole Christmas break excitedly sketching out the framework for an app one called Green Trace, a program to help small businesses track and reduce their carbon footprint. Marcus, already a rising star in the corporate world, had sat with me for hours, nodding, asking sharp questions, taking notes in his leather-bound journal. He called it brilliant and a game changer. I felt a rare flicker of sibling pride, thinking he finally saw me as more than just the dreamy, artistic youngest sister. 3 months later, a contact I had in his firm sent me a press release. Marcus was being promoted to Vice President of Innovation after presenting a groundbreaking internal project called Ecologic. It was my app, stripped of its soul and rebranded for corporate greed. When I confronted him, his voice was chillingly calm. You had a rough sketch, Clara. I turned it into a viable business model. Be happy you contributed. That theft was a clean cut, a quick wound. My sister Beatrice's betrayal was a slow-acting poison. When I dropped out of college, devastated and broke, to try and build my dream on my own, she began her campaign. At wine tastings and family gatherings, she'd sigh with pity. Poor Clara, she'd whisper to our cousins. She's just not stable. Chasing these fantasies. I'm so worried she'll end up with nothing. The rumors spread like a virus. Potential local investors suddenly grew cold. Family friends stopped returning my calls. She painted me as a flighty, unreliable failure, a charity case in the making. She poisoned the well so thoroughly that I had no choice but to leave my hometown with less than $500 to my name. So I vanished. I went completely off their radar, building my real company from scratch in a city where no one knew my name. I let them believe their own narrative, that I was struggling, job hopping, barely scraping by. It was easier that way. It was safer. But now, the call had come. My parents needed me. A part of me, the part that still remembered bedtime stories and scraped knees, knew I had to go. But another, harder part of me knew this was it. This was the last time I would ever let them define me. I wasn't going back for a fight. I was going back to end the whole damn war. And I would do it on my own terms. Packing for my trip home felt like assembling a costume for a play. I pushed aside the designer luggage and pulled out an old, scuffed duffel bag from the back of my walk-in closet. The clothes I chose were relics from a past life, a pair of faded jeans, a gray sweater with a tiny, frayed hole near the cuff, and sneakers that had seen better days. My assistant, Lena, watched me from the doorway, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm just looking at the quarterly reports for the foundation," she said, holding up her tablet. "You're sitting on a fortune, Clara, and you're dressing like a college student heading home to do laundry." I just smiled, pulling my hair back into a simple ponytail. "It's called method acting, Lena. They've already cast me in a role. I'm just showing up in costume." The commercial flight was as uncomfortable as I remembered. I squeezed into a middle seat and listened to a podcast, ignoring the world around me. When I landed, I took a rattling airport shuttle into town instead of a cab. The final act was walking the last half-mile to my parents' house. I arrived to see Marcus's gleaming black Mercedes and Beatrice's white Range Rover parked in the driveway like a pair of smug predators. They were waiting on the porch, looking like they'd just stepped out of a magazine ad for suburban wealth. Marcus wore a crisp polo shirt and tailored slacks. Beatrice was in a flowing floral dress that probably cost more than my first car. Marcus's eyes swept over me, a flicker of disdain in his gaze. "Look what the cat dragged in," he said, not even attempting a hug. "You look exhausted, Clara. Is the freelance life finally catching up to you?" Beatrice glided forward and gave me an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. "Oh, sweetie, it's so good to see you." She pressed a small, brightly wrapped bag into my hand. "Just a little something. I thought you could use a little pick-me-up. It's hard to feel confident in job interviews when you're not feeling your best." I opened it later. It was a cheap, drugstore lipstick in a garish shade of pink. Inside, my parents looked older, more fragile. Mom hugged me tightly, her bones feeling like a bird's. Dad gave me a brief, confused smile, his eyes not quite focusing on me. The house smelled the same, of Mom's baking and Dad's old books, but the energy was different. It was heavy with unspoken anxieties. After a few minutes of stilted small talk, Marcus clapped his hands together, taking charge as always. "All right, let's not discuss the heavy stuff here and worry Mom and Dad. I've made a reservation for us tonight at the vintner's table. We can have a civilized dinner and figure out the finances." My blood ran cold. The vintner's table. It was the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive restaurant in the entire county. A place where a single entree cost what I used to make in a week of waitressing. It was their turf, their power play. A stage perfectly set to highlight just how far beneath them I was supposed to be. Beatrice beamed. "What a wonderful idea, Marcus. A proper family dinner." They both looked at me, expecting me to balk, to make an excuse, to admit I couldn't afford it. I saw the triumphant gleam in their eyes. But the pain I used to feel in these moments was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something cold and sharp and patient. I gave them a small, tired smile. "Sounds great," I said. "I'm starving." The vintner's table was even more pretentious than I remembered. It was a hushed cathedral of wealth, all dark wood, crystal chandeliers, and the soft clinking of silver on porcelain. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The other patrons were draped in quiet luxury, their conversations a low, confident murmur. I followed the hostess through the maze of tables, feeling every pair of eyes slide over my worn sweater and jeans. I was a weed in a meticulously cultivated garden, and my siblings were drinking it in. Marcus, in his element, greeted the maitre d' by name and ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly rent used to be. He swirled the deep red liquid in his glass, holding it up to the light. "You know," he said, addressing the table but looking at me, "it's a shame. Dad's palate is really gone. He can't tell the difference between a premier crew and two-buck chuck anymore." Beatrice, ever the performer, launched into a story about the star-studded charity gala she had just organized. "We raised over $250,000 for the Arts Foundation," she announced, her diamond bracelet catching the light. It's just so fulfilling to be in a position to give back, you know? To help those less fortunate. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, the implication hanging in the air. I stayed quiet, picking at my bread roll, letting them have their stage. I was an audience to the grand play of their success. They talked about Marcus's latest 7-figure real estate deal, Beatrice's upcoming trip to Tuscany, the new wing they were adding to their house. My life, my work, my existence, it was a topic to be avoided, a small, embarrassing stain on their otherwise perfect family portrait. Finally, after the main course was cleared, Marcus leaned forward, his expression turning serious. He pulled out his iPad and tapped the screen, a spreadsheet glowing to life. Okay, let's talk numbers. He detailed the costs of the high-end memory care facility he'd selected for Dad and the in-home nursing care Mom would need. The figures were astronomical, designed to shock and awe. The annual cost is going to be significant, he concluded, his gaze sweeping the table. Beatrice placed her perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. Clara, sweetie, she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. Of course, we don't expect you to contribute anything close to what Marcus and I can. We know your situation. Everyone just chips in what they can. The waiter, a young man with nervous eyes, chose that exact moment to slide the leather-bound check holder onto the center of the table. Marcus glanced at it, a dismissive flick of his wrist. He then leaned across the table towards me, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, just loud enough for Beatrice to hear. Can you even cover the tip? He sneered. Or should I just get this one? It was the final, perfectly aimed arrow. The culmination of a lifetime of 1,000 tiny cuts. My mother, oblivious to the venom in his tone, chimed in with a sigh. Oh, just let your brother and sister handle it, dear. This is for the adults to worry about. The adults. I was 29 years old, the CEO of a company I had built from dust and ashes, and in their eyes, I was still a child at the grown-ups' table. The air went out of the room. I could feel their collective pity, their smug satisfaction. This was my checkmate. My moment of ultimate humiliation. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The long-suffering, hopeful little sister was gone forever. In her place was a woman who was finally, utterly done. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, it really helps. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. Now back to the story. I didn't say a word. I simply met Marcus's mocking gaze, held it for a beat, and then slowly, deliberately, pulled out my phone. A smirk played on his lips. What's wrong, little sister? Calling for an Uber? Don't worry, I'll get you a black car. Can't have you showing up to Mom and Dad's in a Prius. I ignored him. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen, dialing a number I knew by heart. Lena picked up on the first ring. Lena, I said, my voice perfectly level. The entire table was watching me now, their curiosity piqued. I need you to do something for me. Contact my finance team. I want to buy the Vintner's Table restaurant. Right now. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The restaurant you're in? Lena asked, her professional calm finally cracking. That's the one, I confirmed, looking directly at Beatrice, whose smile had frozen on her face. Yes, tonight. Tell them to make the owner an offer he can't refuse. Pay whatever they want. Authorize it from my personal account. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the table with a soft click. The string quartet seemed to have stopped playing. The entire world had narrowed to the 4 shocked faces staring back at me. Beatrice was the first to break the silence, letting out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Oh, Clara, what is this? What kind of pathetic little drama are you trying to stage? Did you hire an actor to play along? This is just sad. Marcus just shook his head, looking at me with what he probably thought was concern, but what I knew was pure contempt. You're unwell, Clara. You're cracking under the pressure. I just sat there, took a slow sip of water, and waited. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. And then, I saw him. The manager, a tall, imposing man who had been gliding around the restaurant with an air of untouchable authority all night, was now speed-walking towards our table. His face was pale, and he was wringing his hands. Trailing just behind him was a shorter, older man in a rumpled suit, talking frantically into his phone. I recognized him from the photos in the lobby. He was the owner. The manager stopped at our table, his eyes darting between all of us before landing on me. He swallowed hard. Miss Evans, he stammered. I nodded. He took a deep breath. We've just received confirmation. The sale is complete. The restaurant, it's yours now. Congratulations. Madam Owner. The sound that followed was a symphony of chaos. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp as her wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor and splashing red wine all over her pristine white dress like a spray of blood. Across the table, Marcus, who had just taken a large bite of his filet mignon, started choking violently, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with utter incomprehension, while my father just stared into the middle distance, lost in his own world. I calmly raised my hand to get the attention of our terrified young waiter. The check is taken care of, I said, my voice ringing out with newfound clarity in the silent restaurant. And please, inform all the other guests, tonight, dinner is on the house. I stood up from the table, the sudden motion causing everyone to flinch. The performance was over. The party's finished, I announced to my shell-shocked family. But our conversation isn't. Follow me. I walked out of the main dining room without a backward glance. I could hear them scrambling behind me, a confused mess of whispers and Marcus's lingering coughs. As we stepped out into the cool night air, the valet rushed forward, but froze when he saw the scene waiting at the curb. It wasn't a taxi or an Uber. It was a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Ghost, its engine purring so quietly it was barely audible. My driver, a stoic man named Gabe, stood holding the rear door open. But that wasn't all. In the large, empty lot adjacent to the restaurant, the unmistakable whump-whump-whump of helicopter blades was spinning up. A sleek, dark Augusta helicopter sat on the asphalt, its navigation lights blinking in the darkness. I turned to my family. They stood huddled together on the sidewalk, looking utterly lost. Their expensive clothes and confident airs had vanished, replaced by gaping mouths and wide, terrified eyes. We have two options, I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rotors. We can take the car, or we can take the helicopter. The helicopter's faster. No one moved. It was as if their brains had short-circuited, unable to process the reality unfolding in front of them. Finally, almost in a trance, my mother took a hesitant step forward. My father followed her lead. Beatrice and Marcus, looking like they were walking to their own execution, trailed behind. The flight was short and silent. Strapped into the plush leather seats, my family stared out the windows, their faces pale in the flashing lights of the cockpit. They watched the familiar landscape of their small, predictable town shrink below them, replaced by the sprawling, glittering expanse of the countryside. They kept stealing glances at me, as if trying to reconcile the broke little sister from dinner with the woman who now commanded a private helicopter. I offered them nothing, my expression a calm, unreadable mask. Soon, the helicopter began its descent towards a massive, dark patch of land. As we got closer, lights flickered on, illuminating a long driveway, meticulously landscaped grounds, and then, the house. It wasn't a house, it was an estate. A stunning piece of modern architecture, all glass and steel and warm wood, nestled among rolling hills and what looked like a private vineyard, a massive lake gleaming under the moonlight. The helicopter settled onto a helipad with a gentle bump. Gabe was already there, having driven the Rolls-Royce ahead. He opened the door, and I stepped out. I led my silent, stumbling family past a large infinity pool and through a set of massive glass doors into the main house. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior, a cavernous living space with a 30-foot ceiling, a grand piano in one corner, and an entire wall of glass overlooking the valley. I turned to face them, their faces a collage of disbelief and horror. "Welcome to my home," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Well, one of them, anyway." I led them into a sitting area with low-slung Italian leather sofas arranged around a fireplace that was more of a modern art installation. They sat down stiffly, looking like prisoners awaiting their sentence. I remained standing, a position of power I had never before held in their presence. "You have questions," I said. It wasn't a question. Marcus found his voice first, a raspy, angry whisper. "What is all this, Clara? Did you win the lottery? What the hell is going on?" "There was no lottery, Marcus," I said calmly. I gestured for Lena, who had been waiting discreetly in the wings, to come forward. She handed me a slim portfolio. "You remember my rough sketch? The little app one called Green Trace?" I opened the portfolio and slid a document across the polished oak coffee table. "This is the acquisition agreement from 6 months ago. The company I built from that sketch was sold for $80 million. I retained a significant share and a leadership role." The color drained from Marcus's face. Beatrice just stared, her mouth slightly agape. "But that's not all," I continued, my voice cold and methodical. "You see, when you run a company like mine, you learn the importance of due diligence. You learn how to see past the shiny surface." I looked at Marcus. "Like the surface of your career. I know your firm is leveraged to the hilt, and you're personally so deep in debt trying to maintain this lifestyle that one bad deal will wipe you out completely. That 7-figure deal you were bragging about. It doesn't exist." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence was a confession. I then turned my gaze to Beatrice. "And your perfect life, Beatrice. The charity galas and the Instagram-worthy vacations. I know your husband filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. I know you spend most nights alone in that big, empty house, wondering why you feel so hollow. The rumors you spread about me being unstable. It seems you were just projecting." Tears welled in her eyes, hot tears of humiliation, not sorrow. She finally snapped. "Why are you doing this? You're doing all of this just to hurt us." "Hurt you?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "No. This isn't about hurting you. This is about the truth." I pulled out one last document. It was a series of bank statements. And this is the final piece of it. "Mom, Dad, for the past 2 years, every unexpected insurance refund you've received, every time a large medical bill magically disappeared, that was me. I've been paying for everything through an anonymous trust fund." My mother finally broke, a sob escaping her lips. "That was you." But Marcus and Beatrice didn't see an act of love. They saw it as the ultimate betrayal. "You liar!" Marcus exploded, jumping to his feet. "You sat there, letting us think you were a pathetic charity case, while you were playing God behind our backs. You were always jealous of us, and this is your sick, twisted revenge." Beatrice joined in, her voice shrill with rage. "You're selfish. You kept all this a secret just so you could have this one big gotcha moment and act like a hero. You wanted to humiliate us. I looked at their contorted, angry faces, and in that moment, all the lingering pain, all the years of craving their approval, it all just vanished. I wasn't looking at family. I was looking at two strangers who were angrier at being exposed than they were sorry for a lifetime of cruelty. They would never change. I held up a hand, and the sheer authority in the gesture silenced them. The shouting stopped. The room fell into a heavy, waiting silence. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "I am selfish. I'm finally selfish enough to put my own peace of mind above your fragile egos." I walked over to the great glass wall overlooking the valley. "I've already made all the arrangements for Mom and Dad," I said, my back to them. "They have a suite waiting for them at the finest care facility in the state, a facility my foundation owns. Every doctor, every nurse, every meal, every possible need they could ever have has been taken care of. For the rest of their lives. You two don't have to contribute a single dime. You don't have to worry about it ever again." I turned back to face them. "I used to dream of the day I'd come home and you'd finally be proud of me," I confessed, a sad smile touching my lips. "I spent years chasing the approval of two people who only ever saw me as a reflection of their own insecurities. I'm done." My gaze settled on Marcus, then on Beatrice. "You have your lives. You have your lies. You can keep them." I nodded to Gabe, who had appeared silently at the edge of the room. "Gabe will take Mom and Dad home now." I walked over to my parents, kissed my mother's tear-stained cheek, and squeezed my father's hand. "I love you both," I whispered. As Gabe gently escorted them out, Marcus stammered, "What about us? How are we supposed to get back?" I gave him a final, empty look. "Gabe will be back shortly," I said. "He'll be happy to drive you to the nearest bus station." The look of pure, unadulterated shock on their faces was the last thing I saw before I turned and walked away, deeper into my own home, into my own life. As the sound of the Rolls-Royce's engine faded into the distance, I stood alone in the magnificent, silent house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the failure, the outcast, or the secret. I was just free. The weight of their judgment, a burden I had carried since childhood, was finally gone. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that real family isn't about blood. It's about the people who see your light and don't try to dim it. Was I wrong for finally exposing them and cutting them off like that, or was it the only way to find my own peace? Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever had to deal with toxic family members, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one.